Sarah Jenkins walked through the busy hallways of Atlanta General Hospital, her comfortable nursing shoes making soft squeaks against the freshly polished floor. It was just another Tuesday morning in March, or so she thought. The bright sunlight streamed through the large windows, creating patterns on the white walls as she made her way to the rehabilitation ward. At 28 years old, Sarah had already made a name for herself as one of the most caring nurses in the hospital. Her colleagues often joked that she had a special touch. Patients under her care seemed to recover faster, smile more, and fight harder. Maybe it was her warm brown eyes, or perhaps it was the gentle way she spoke to everyone. Something about Sarah made people feel safe. "Good morning, Mrs. Rodriguez," she called out cheerfully to one of her regular patients, who was slowly making her way down the corridor with a walker. The elderly woman beamed back at her. This was Sarah's normal routine, greeting patients, checking charts, and bringing a little brightness to what could otherwise be difficult days for many people. As she reached the nurse's station, her friend and colleague Lisa handed her a new patient file. "We got a transfer from City Memorial last night," Lisa explained, sipping her morning coffee. "Room 407. He's been there for the past 6 months after a bad car accident. Name's Michael Thompson." Sarah nodded, opening the file to familiarize herself with the new patient's history. Michael Thompson, 32 years old, software engineer. The accident had left him paralyzed from the waist down. She read through his treatment plans and medication schedule carefully, making mental notes. When she entered room 407, she wasn't prepared for what she saw. Unlike many patients who often look defeated by their circumstances, Michael Thompson sat in his wheelchair by the window, typing away on a laptop balanced on a small portable desk. His dark brown hair caught the morning light, and despite the obvious signs of long-term hospitalization around him, he had an air of determination about him. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson," Sarah said, walking into the room with her usual warm smile. "I'm Sarah Jenkins, and I'll be your primary nurse during your stay here." Michael looked up from his screen, and for a moment, Sarah felt something she hadn't expected, a small flutter in her chest. His eyes were a striking shade of green, and despite everything he'd been through, they held a spark of humor and intelligence. "Please call me Michael," he replied with a gentle smile. "Mr. Thompson makes me sound like my dad." His voice was warm and friendly, without any trace of the bitterness she often encountered in patients dealing with life-altering injuries. As Sarah checked his vitals and went through her routine questions, they fell into easy conversation. She learned that he was still working remotely for his software company, refusing to let his condition stop him from doing what he loved. He asked about her experiences as a nurse, showing genuine interest in her stories about the hospital. "You know," he said thoughtfully as she adjusted his IV, "I've been in hospitals for 6 months now, and you're the first person who's talked to me like a normal human being instead of just a patient." Sarah paused, touched by his words. "Well, that's because you are a normal human being, Michael. The wheelchair doesn't change that." He looked at her with surprise, then broke into a genuine smile that transformed his entire face. "I think I'm going to like it here," he said softly. Throughout her shift, Sarah found herself making extra stops at room 407. Each time, she told herself it was just to ensure her new patient was settling in well. But deep down, she knew there was something different about Michael Thompson. The way he made her laugh with clever observations about hospital life, how he listened intently when she spoke, and most importantly, how he faced his challenges with grace and determination, it all drew her in. As she left the hospital that evening, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about room 407. She didn't know it yet, but that ordinary Tuesday in March would turn out to be the beginning of an extraordinary journey. Sometimes the biggest changes in life come disguised as just another day at work, and for Sarah Jenkins, her life was about to change in ways she never could have imagined. Over the next few weeks, Sarah found herself looking forward to her shifts more than ever before. Each day, she and Michael's conversations grew longer and more personal. The rehabilitation ward became a place where laughter could often be heard coming from room 407, drawing curious glances from other staff members. One rainy morning, Sarah arrived at work to find Michael struggling with his physical therapy session. His usual smile was replaced with frustration as he tried to complete his exercises. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his knuckles were white from gripping the parallel bars. "I can't do this anymore," he said through gritted teeth, his arms shaking from the effort. "What's the point?" Sarah watched from the doorway for a moment before stepping in. Instead of offering the usual medical encouragement, she pulled up a chair and sat down at eye level with him. "Tell me what's really bothering you, Michael. This isn't like you." Michael's shoulders slumped. "My sister's getting married next month," he said quietly. "She asked me to walk her down the aisle since our dad passed away last year. I promised her I would, Sarah. I promised her before the accident." Sarah felt her heart ache for him, but she didn't show pity. She knew he would hate that. Instead, she reached for his hand. "Then we'll find a way. It might not be the way you imagined, but we'll make it special." For the first time since she'd known him, Michael let his guard down completely. "Everyone keeps telling me to be realistic, to accept my limitations. My own mother suggested my brother should do it instead." His voice cracked slightly. "But how do I accept that I can't be there for my little sister the way I promised?" Sarah squeezed his hand gently. "Who says you can't be there for her? Being there isn't just about walking, Michael. It's about being present, being strong, being the brother she needs." Over the next hour, they talked about possibilities. Sarah suggested ways they could modify the traditional walk down the aisle, incorporating his wheelchair in a meaningful way. As they brainstormed, Michael's spark slowly returned. However, their growing closeness didn't go unnoticed. One afternoon, Lisa cornered Sarah in the break room. "Sarah, honey, we need to talk," she said with concern in her voice. "The other nurses are talking. You're spending an awful lot of time with Mr. Thompson." Sarah felt her defenses rise. "He's my patient, Lisa. I'm doing my job." "We both know it's more than that," Lisa replied gently. "I see the way you look at him and the way he looks at you. But honey, you need to think this through. Are you ready for all the challenges that would come with—" She paused, searching for the right words. "With dating someone in a wheelchair." Sarah finished, her voice sharp. "The same way people weren't ready for me to date outside my race. The same way some patients still do a double take when they see a black nurse in charge of their care." Lisa had the grace to look embarrassed. "I just don't want to see you get hurt." "Michael is one of the strongest, most incredible people I've ever met," Sarah said firmly. "His disability doesn't define him, just like my race doesn't define me." That evening, as Sarah was helping Michael prepare for bed, he seemed unusually quiet. "I heard what happened in the break room," he finally said. "The walls in hospitals aren't as thick as people think." Sarah felt her face grow warm. "Michael, You should listen to your friend," he interrupted, his voice heavy. "You deserve someone who can give you a normal life, Sarah. Someone who can dance with you, travel with you, not hold you back." Sarah stood there for a moment, then deliberately sat on the edge of his bed. "Normal is overrated," she said simply. "And for the record, I've never been much of a dancer anyway." For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Then Michael reached up and touched her cheek gently. "You're something else, Sarah Jenkins." As she left his room that night, Sarah knew they had crossed a line. What had started as a nurse-patient relationship had grown into something more, something that scared and excited her in equal measure. But for the first time in her life, she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As summer approached, Michael's sister's wedding became the center of their conversations. Sarah had officially finished her rotation in the rehabilitation ward, but she still visited Michael during her breaks and after her shifts. Together, they worked on his surprise for the wedding. He had been practicing moving smoothly in his wheelchair, determined to escort his sister down the aisle with dignity. One particularly warm evening, Sarah arrived at Michael's room to find him dressed in a crisp button-down shirt, his wheelchair positioned by a small table that someone had decorated with a cloth and an electric candle. "What's all this?" she asked, surprised. "Well," Michael said with a nervous smile, "since I can't take you out to dinner properly, I thought I'd bring dinner to us." He gestured to 2 covered plates that sat on the table. "I had some help from the cafeteria staff. Turns out they're quite romantic when you tell them the right story." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them away quickly. The simple hospital meal had been transformed into something special, complete with plastic cups filled with grape juice pretending to be wine. As they ate, Michael told her about his life before the accident, his work as a software engineer, his dreams of starting his own company, and how everything had changed in an instant on that rainy night. "But you know what's strange?" he said, looking at her intently. If it hadn't been for that accident, I never would have met you." "Are you saying it was worth it?" Sarah asked softly. Michael thought for a moment. "I'm saying that sometimes life's biggest challenges bring us our biggest blessings." Their evening was interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Michael's mother, Patricia Thompson, making an unexpected visit. She stopped short at the sight of their dinner setup, her eyes moving from the table to Sarah, then back to Michael. "Mom," Michael said, straightening in his chair, "this is Sarah. I told you about her." Patricia's face was unreadable as she looked at Sarah. "Yes, the nurse you mentioned." Her tone was polite but cool. "I didn't realize you two were socializing outside of your professional duties." Sarah stood up, feeling both proud and nervous. "It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Thompson. Michael has told me so much about you." "Has he?" Patricia replied, setting her purse down. "He hasn't told me much about you at all." She turned to Michael. "Honey, I came to discuss the wedding arrangements. Perhaps we could have some privacy." Before Michael could respond, Sarah gathered her things. "Of course, I should get going anyway. My shift starts early tomorrow." She squeezed Michael's hand quickly before leaving, feeling Patricia's eyes on her back. Through the partially closed door, she could hear Patricia's concerned voice. "Michael, what are you thinking? She seems like a lovely girl, but have you really considered what you're getting into?" "What she's getting into?" "Mom, stop." Michael's voice was firm. "Sarah sees me for who I am, not what I can't do, and I love her for that." Sarah froze in the hallway. It was the first time either of them had used the word love. The next day, Sarah found a handwritten note in her locker. "I meant what my mom overheard. I do love you, and I'm sorry if that complicates things. M." With trembling fingers, Sarah pulled out her phone and typed a message. "It doesn't complicate anything. I love you too. Everything else we can figure out together." That evening, when she visited him again, something had changed. Their relationship felt more real, more solid. They talked about practical things, how they would handle daily challenges, what their future might look like, how they would deal with people's reactions. "You know this won't be easy," Michael said, holding her hand. "There will be days when I'm frustrated, when I feel like less than what you deserve." Sarah looked at their intertwined fingers, her dark skin against his lighter tone, both equally strong, equally determined. "And there will be days when people stare at us, whisper about us, judge us without knowing us. But I choose this. I choose us." Michael pulled her closer, and as she leaned down to kiss him, they both knew that they had crossed another threshold. Their love story might not be conventional, but it was theirs, and they were ready to write the next chapters together. The day of Michael's sister Amy's wedding arrived with perfect spring weather. Sarah helped Michael get ready in his hospital room, which had become their special place over the past months. She carefully adjusted his bow tie while he watched her with a sparkle in his green eyes. "Are you nervous?" Sarah asked, smoothing down his suit jacket. "About being in the wedding?" "No," Michael smiled. "About introducing you to my entire family as my girlfriend?" "Terrified." Sarah laughed, but she felt butterflies in her stomach too. This would be their first public appearance as a couple, and she knew there would be stares and whispers. Michael's mother, Patricia, had slowly begun to warm up to her, but many of their relatives didn't even know Michael was dating anyone, let alone a black nurse from his hospital. The wedding venue was a beautiful garden not far from the hospital. Sarah had helped the wedding planners create a smooth path for Michael's wheelchair, making sure he could move easily during the ceremony. As they arrived, Michael's sister Amy rushed over to them, looking beautiful in her white dress. "Michael, Sarah." Amy hugged them both. "I'm so glad you're here early. And Sarah, thank you for everything you've done to help with the arrangements." Unlike their mother, Amy had embraced Sarah from the start. She had seen how happy her brother was, and that was all that mattered to her. As they talked, other family members began to arrive. Sarah noticed the curious glances, the subtle double takes, but she held her head high. "Ready to make your sister cry happy tears?" Sarah asked Michael as they prepared for the ceremony. Michael took a deep breath and nodded. They had practiced this moment for weeks. As the music started, Michael positioned his wheelchair at the beginning of the aisle. Emmy stood beside him, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. The guests watched in amazement as Michael smoothly guided his wheelchair down the aisle, his sister walking proudly beside him. There wasn't a dry eye in the garden. Even Patricia was openly crying. finally seeing her son not as someone limited by his disability, but as a proud brother fulfilling his promise. During the reception, Sarah sat next to Michael at the family table, where he insisted she belong. As they enjoyed the dinner, Michael seemed distracted, checking his phone more often than usual. "Is everything okay?" Sarah asked quietly. "Perfect," he replied with a mysterious smile. "Just perfect." After the main course, Michael clinked his glass for attention. The garden fell silent as he moved his wheelchair to the center of the dance floor. Sarah watched, confused, as Amy's new husband brought out a microphone. First, Michael began, "I want to congratulate my beautiful sister and her wonderful husband." He paused as everyone applauded. "But I hope you'll forgive me for stealing just a small moment of their spotlight." He turned to face Sarah, who felt her heart begin to race. "Sarah Jenkins," he continued, his voice strong and clear, "8 months ago, I was in a very dark place. I thought my life was over. Then you walked into room 407 and turned on the light." He reached into his jacket pocket. "You never saw me as broken. You never treated me as less. You saw me for who I am, and you loved me not in spite of my challenges, but as a whole person." Sarah's hands flew to her mouth as Michael produced a small velvet box. The garden was completely silent now. "I know people will say we're crazy. They'll say we're moving too fast, that we haven't thought this through. But when you find the person who makes you want to be better every day, who fights your battles with you, who loves you completely, you don't let them go." Opening the box to reveal a beautiful diamond ring, Michael looked up at Sarah with tears in his eyes. "Sarah Jenkins, will you marry me?" Sarah couldn't speak for a moment. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she looked at the man she loved, the man who had shown her what true strength looked like. Around them, the garden held its collective breath. Finally, she found her voice. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes." As she bent down to kiss him, the garden erupted in applause and cheers. Amy was crying happy tears again, and even Patricia was smiling through her tears. In that moment, no one saw a black woman and a disabled man. They saw only love, pure and strong and real. Michael slipped the ring onto her finger, and Sarah knew that this was just the beginning of their story. The months following their engagement flew by in a whirlwind of planning and preparations. Sarah and Michael decided on a small garden wedding, similar to Amy's but with their own special touches. Every detail needed careful consideration to ensure the day would be perfect and accessible for Michael. One evening, as they sat in Michael's new apartment going through wedding plans, Sarah noticed he seemed distracted. He kept looking at his phone and smiling at messages. "Okay, what's going on?" she asked, putting down the color swatches they'd been discussing. "You've been acting mysterious for weeks now." Michael grinned. "Actually, I have something to show you." He wheeled himself over to his laptop and opened an email. "Remember Dr. Chen from physical therapy? He's been working with a research team on a new type of mobility assistance device." Sarah moved closer to look at the screen, her eyes widening as she read. The email detailed an experimental treatment program combining advanced robotic leg braces with intensive physical therapy. "They're looking for participants," Michael said quietly, "and Dr. Chen recommended me for the program." Sarah's heart raced. "Michael, this could be, but the success rate? The risks? It's not a cure," he quickly added. "But if it works, I might be able to stand for short periods. Maybe even take a few steps with support." His eyes sparkled with hope. "Imagine if I could stand with you during our wedding vows." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. "When would it start?" "That's the thing," Michael hesitated. "The initial training would take 3 months. If I want to have any chance of being ready for the wedding, I'd need to start next week." But, he took her hand, "I'd have to go to their research facility in Chicago." Sarah's heart sank a little. 3 months apart would be hard, but she could see how much this meant to him. "Then we'll make it work," she said firmly. "I can fly up on my days off, and we'll video chat every day." "You're sure?" Michael searched her face. "It's a lot to ask, especially with all the wedding planning." Sarah leaned down and kissed him softly. "You've always supported my dreams. Now it's my turn to support yours." The next few weeks were a blur of activity. While Michael prepared for his trip to Chicago, Sarah threw herself into wedding preparations. She found a beautiful venue with accessible gardens, worked with a designer to create the perfect wheelchair-friendly aisle runner, and spent hours with Patricia, who had become her unexpected ally in wedding planning. The morning Michael left for Chicago was harder than either of them expected. At the airport, Sarah helped him check his specially equipped van and made sure all his medical documents were in order. "Promise you won't peek at my dress while I'm gone," Sarah teased, trying to keep the mood light despite her watery eyes. "Promise you won't find another software engineer while I'm away," Michael joked back, but she could hear the slight tremor in his voice. "Never," she whispered, bending down to hug him tightly. "You're stuck with me, Thompson." As she watched him go through security, Sarah felt a mix of emotions. Pride in his courage to try this experimental treatment, fear of what might happen, and hope for what it could mean for their future. That evening, Sarah sat in their apartment, surrounded by wedding magazines and sample invitations. Her phone buzzed with a message from Michael. "Made it to Chicago, missing you already. By the way, check the bottom drawer of my desk." Curious, Sarah wheeled his office chair over to his desk and opened the bottom drawer. Inside was a small box with a note. "Open one every week I'm gone. Love, M." Sarah opened the first box with trembling fingers. Inside was a small silver charm in the shape of a nurse's cap, along with a note. "To remind you of the day we met. Week 1 of 12 until I see your beautiful face again." She clasped the charm tightly, smiling through her tears. The next 3 months would be challenging, but Sarah knew that every step Michael took in Chicago would be a step toward their future together. As she got ready for bed, she sent him one last message. "Counting down the days, my love. Week 1 begins." The 3 months of separation passed both slowly and quickly. Sarah kept herself busy with wedding preparations and her nursing shifts, while Michael sent daily updates about his progress in Chicago. Their nightly video calls became the highlight of both their days, though they carefully avoided discussing the details of his treatment. Michael wanted the results to be a surprise. 2 weeks before the wedding, Sarah stood nervously at the airport arrival gate. She hadn't seen Michael in person for 12 weeks, the longest they'd been apart since meeting. Her heart pounded as she watched passengers emerge from the gate. Finally, she saw him. Michael was wheeling himself through the gate, looking stronger than she remembered. His arms seemed more muscular, and he sat straighter in his chair. When their eyes met, his entire face lit up. "Sarah," he called out, moving faster toward her. She ran to him, not caring about the people watching as she threw her arms around him. "I missed you so much," she whispered against his neck. "I have so much to tell you," he said excitedly, but then caught himself. "But not yet. After the wedding." On the drive home, Sarah noticed small changes in Michael. He seemed more confident in his movements, and there was an energy about him she hadn't seen before. Whatever had happened in Chicago, it had clearly changed him. The final 2 weeks before the wedding passed in a whirlwind. Family started arriving from out of town, including Michael's elderly grandmother, Martha, who took one look at Sarah and declared, "This one's a keeper, Michael. Don't you dare let her go." The night before the wedding, Sarah couldn't sleep. She stood at her apartment window, looking out at the city lights. Her phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Can't sleep either. Too excited to marry you tomorrow." Sarah smiled and replied, "Just think, this time tomorrow, I'll be Mrs. Thompson." "About that," he texted back. "I have something planned for tomorrow. Just trust me, okay?" The morning of the wedding dawned clear and beautiful. Sarah's bridesmaids helped her into her dress, an elegant white gown that flowed like water when she moved. Her mother cried when she saw her, touching the pearl necklace that had been in their family for generations. "Your father would have been so proud," her mother said softly, adjusting Sarah's veil. At the garden venue, guests were already being seated. Sarah peeked out from her preparation room and saw Michael's groomsmen gathering near the altar. But where was Michael? "Don't worry," Amy assured her, seeing her concern. "He's just getting ready. Everything's perfect." The ceremony was scheduled for 2 p.m. At 1:55, there was a knock at Sarah's door. It was Patricia, Michael's mother, her eyes shining with tears. "Sarah," she said, taking her hands. "I just wanted to say, I was wrong about you. You've shown me what real love looks like, and I'm proud to call you my daughter." Sarah hugged her future mother-in-law, careful not to wrinkle her dress. "Thank you," she whispered. "That means everything to me." The music began, signaling the start of the ceremony. Sarah's bridesmaids lined up, each carrying bouquets of white and purple flowers. Her mother stood beside her, ready to walk her down the aisle. Through the doors, Sarah could see their 100 guests standing. The garden was decorated with flowing white fabric and purple flowers, just as she had imagined. But when her eyes reached the altar, she gasped. Michael's wheelchair was there, but it was empty. For a moment, panic gripped her heart. Then the wedding planner gave her the signal to start walking. As she stepped through the doors on her mother's arm, she saw something that made her stop in her tracks. There, at the altar, Michael was standing. He was supported by two specially designed braces that ran along his legs, and he held onto a beautifully decorated support bar that had been disguised as part of the wedding arch. But he was standing, tall and proud, waiting for his bride. Sarah felt tears rolling down her cheeks as she began her walk down the aisle. Every step brought her closer to the miracle before her. The guests were a blur of happy faces and tears, but she saw only Michael, standing there with love and triumph shining in his eyes. This, she realized, was what he had been working toward in Chicago. This was his wedding gift to her, the ability to stand beside her as they began their life together. The wedding ceremony was more beautiful than either Sarah or Michael could have imagined. As she reached the altar, Michael remained standing, supported by his braces and the decorated bar. His eyes never left her face, even as tears rolled down his cheeks. The minister smiled at them both and began the ceremony. We are gathered here today to witness something extraordinary, not just the union of two people in marriage, but the triumph of love over every obstacle life can present. Sarah could hardly focus on the words being spoken. Her mind kept returning to the fact that Michael was standing beside her. She noticed small beads of sweat on his forehead. This was clearly taking tremendous effort, but his smile never wavered. When it came time for their vows, Michael spoke first. His voice was strong and clear, carrying across the garden. Sarah Jenkins, when I first met you in room 407, I was a man who had lost hope. I thought my life was over, that no one could ever love someone like me. He paused, steadying himself against the bar. But you showed me that love doesn't see limitations. You saw past my wheelchair to the man inside. You fought for us when others doubted. You loved me when I couldn't love myself. He took a shaky breath before continuing. And because of that love, I found the strength to do what everyone said was impossible. I'm standing here today not just because of medical science, but because your love gave me the courage to try. I promise to spend every day of our life together showing you the same strength, courage, and unconditional love you've shown me. Sarah wiped away tears as she began her own vows. Michael Thompson, you call me your strength, but you've been mine too. You've shown me what real courage looks like. You taught me that love isn't about what a person can or cannot do. It's about who they are in their heart. She reached out to hold his free hand. People say we're an unlikely couple. They say we're too different. But standing here with you today, I know we're exactly who we're meant to be. I promise to be your partner in all things, to face whatever challenges come our way together, and to love you more with each passing day. As they exchanged rings, Michael's hands trembled slightly from the effort of standing, but his movements were sure. The golden bands glinted in the afternoon sun as they slipped them onto each other's fingers. By the power vested in me, the minister said, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. Sarah carefully stepped closer, mindful of Michael's balance. Their kiss was gentle but filled with love, and their guests erupted in applause and cheers. Some were crying, others were smiling through their tears, but everyone felt the power of the moment. As they turned to face their guests as Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, Michael whispered, I need to sit now. Sarah smoothly helped him back into his wheelchair, which had been decorated with white and purple flowers to match their wedding theme. The guests rose to their feet, applauding as they made their way back down the aisle together. Rose petals showered down on them from both sides. Sarah saw her mother crying happy tears, Patricia beaming with pride, and Amy jumping up and down with excitement. At the reception, Michael had another surprise planned. While he couldn't stand for long periods, he had worked with his physical therapist to prepare something special. When it was time for their first dance, he moved his wheelchair onto the dance floor. Sarah followed, unsure what to expect. The music began, At Last by Etta James, and Michael pressed a button on his wheelchair. With the help of his braces, he slowly rose to standing position again. May I have this dance, Mrs. Thompson? He asked, holding out his arms within the support frame that had been quickly set up. Sarah stepped into his embrace, and they swayed gently to the music. It wasn't the kind of dance she had imagined as a little girl, but it was perfect in its own way. Michael couldn't move much, but they were in each other's arms, and that was all that mattered. "I love you," she whispered against his chest. "I love you too," he replied, holding her close. And this is just the beginning. Their guests watched in silence, witnessing a love that had overcome every obstacle in its path. It wasn't just a first dance. It was a testament to the power of love, determination, and the human spirit. As the wedding reception continued into the evening, Sarah prepared to give her bride's speech. She stood up, champagne glass in hand, looking out at their friends and family. Michael sat beside her, still glowing with accomplishment from their first dance. "I want to thank everyone for being here today," Sarah began, her voice filled with emotion. "When Michael and I first told people we were getting married, we heard a lot of concerns. People worried about our differences, not just the physical challenges, but our different backgrounds, cultures, and lives." She paused, looking down at Michael with love in her eyes. But love doesn't care about differences. Love doesn't see limitations. Love sees possibilities. Just as she was about to continue, Michael touched her arm gently. "Sarah," he said, his eyes twinkling with excitement, "before you go on, there's something else I need to share with everyone." Sarah looked confused as Michael wheeled himself to the center of the room. Dr. Chen, who had flown in from Chicago for the wedding, stepped forward with a small remote control device. "During my time in Chicago," Michael announced, "I wasn't just learning to stand. The program I participated in was testing the revolutionary new assistive technology." He pressed a button on his wheelchair, and his leg braces whirred softly. "And today, on our wedding day, I want to share with everyone, especially my beautiful wife, what else I learned to do." Slowly, carefully, Michael rose to his feet. But this time, instead of staying in one place, he took a small step forward, then another, and another. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth in shock. The room fell completely silent except for the soft mechanical sounds of the braces. Michael walked, slowly but steadily, across the room toward his wife. It was only about 10 steps, but to everyone watching, it might as well have been a marathon. When he reached Sarah, he took both her hands in his. "The doctors say I'll never walk normally again," he said, his voice carrying in the quiet room. "These braces can only work for short periods, and I'll always need my wheelchair. But thanks to this technology, and more importantly, thanks to your love giving me the strength to try, I can now share moments like this with you." Sarah couldn't speak through her tears. She wrapped her arms around him, holding him tight as their guests broke into thunderous applause. Even the wedding photographers were wiping away tears as they captured the moment. Dr. Chen stepped forward to explain the technology, a combination of advanced robotics, neural sensors, and countless hours of therapy. But most people were too caught up in the emotion of the moment to fully listen. Later that night, as the reception was winding down, Sarah and Michael found a quiet moment alone in the garden. The fairy lights twinkled above them, and soft music drifted out from the reception hall. "You kept this secret all those months," Sarah said, sitting on a bench beside Michael's wheelchair. "All those video calls, all those mysterious messages." Michael took her hand, running his thumb over her wedding ring. "I wanted to be sure it would work. I couldn't bear to get your hopes up if it didn't. But every time I wanted to give up during therapy, I thought of this moment. I thought of you." Sarah leaned her head on his shoulder. "You know this doesn't change anything for me. I fell in love with you, wheelchair and all." "I know," Michael smiled. "That's why I wanted to do it. Not because we needed it, but because you gave me the courage to try. You taught me that love means never giving up, never stopping trying, never letting fear win." As they sat there in the garden, Sarah thought about their journey, from that first meeting in room 407 to this magical evening. Their story wasn't about a miracle cure or overcoming disability. It was about two people who chose love over fear, hope over doubt, and possibility over limitation. "Ready to go greet our guests, Mrs. Thompson?" Michael asked, his eyes shining with happiness. "Ready for anything, Mr. Thompson," Sarah replied, standing up. "As long as we're together." And as they made their way back to the reception, both knew that while their wedding day was ending, their greatest adventure was just beginning. Their love story would continue to inspire others, proving that true love knows no boundaries, overcomes all obstacles, and always, always finds a way. The end.